My name's Ryan Aller. I'm a detective with the Belmont County Sheriff's Office. I've been working homicide cases for 15 years. The day I got the call, I was at home sick. I hadn't taken a sick day in probably 10 years.
Aller.
We don't get a lot of homicide calls. So when I got this call, I had to respond. It's all hands on deck.
So what are we looking at?
Gunshot. Close range from the looks of it.
When I arrived, I was briefed by Detective Rusty Lucy.
I told Ryan there was no forced entry, there was no windows broken out, nothing seemed to be ransacked. We had a male who was laying face down, appeared to be shot in the back.
Position of the body tells us as investigators that the shooter was behind the person. Was it a interrupted burglary? Was it someone that the victim knew that they felt comfortable turning their back on?
We discovered his wallet with his ID. The victim has cash on him, which makes us believe that this wasn't some type of breaking and entering or home invasion type scenario.
It did not take us very long to ID the victim at all. The victim used to be the mayor several years ago of Powhatan.
Yeah, that's the mayor, all right. Damn.
Marvin Brown was a very popular person in the community.
Look up at me one more time. There we go.
Marvin Brown had been mayor for a couple of years in Powhatan. He was a big, hearty, husky character. He would help anybody who needed it, but he wouldn't take any nonsense.
When Chief Investigator Aller realizes the identity of that victim, he certainly knows this is going to be different. Murder is ugly, but high-profile murder is infinitely worse. It draws the maximum attention of the press and the public. It makes a very difficult investigation.
There was no weapon found anywhere near the body or anywhere near the scene in general. In the bedroom, next to the bed, was a blanket.
And then near the living room area, we discovered a 9mm shell casing. But our main concern was, where's the bullet?
They see evidence of ricochet off a wall, but they don't find a slug. They think that's very odd.
The bullet must have been pretty easy to see for the killer to take it. Because if they would have took the time to really look for it, they would have took the casing as well. That bullet must have been glowing.
The big question is always why. Why is this gentleman laying in his hunting cabin, shot in his back?
The family gathered at Marvin's residence, and we needed to start talking to them.
One of the worst things I did in my entire career is make death notifications, and it is absolutely the most horrible thing you can imagine.
It was a pretty big shock for the family.
Detective Aller said that there was foul play, that somebody shot him.
I was so upset and mad that somebody did that to him. Shot him in the back. You're making me cry now. My dad was a tough guy. He was 70 years old and you still couldn't keep up with him. He was very healthy. And he came back from the Army, and Dad was a union leader down at the steel mill where he worked at for about 30 years.
At the time when the mill started closing down, he was resilient. It's like, I gotta find something else, and that's what he did.
Marvin is a wealthy man. He owns an extremely successful contracting business.
He ran for mayor for a number of reasons. My dad was a leader, and that's what he always stressed all our life, be a leader.
Even though Marvin hadn't been the mayor for 20 years, everybody called him the mayor. Marvin was a force of nature in that small town.
Now, a lot of people, when you walk into someplace, they go, hey, Mayor, just messing with him.
I know this has been extremely distressing for all of you, but I do need to speak to Mrs. Brown.
Aller is also aware that Marvin Brown has a second wife. The new wife's name is Deborah, who he's been married to for 10 years.
He absolutely loved Deb. Always a happy marriage.
Deborah works with Marvin in the business. She is his bookkeeper. She's responsible for the payment of bills and payroll and that sort of thing. Marvin and Deborah are partners in business as well as in life. They make a great team. She has a daughter. Her daughter's name is Meredith, and this daughter is pregnant. Meredith is not Marvin Brown's child. She's his stepchild, but he treats her as if she is his own.
Dad loved all his stepchildren, and he was especially close to Meredith because she was youngest.
I mean, it was a pretty stressful night. Deborah Brown had taken her daughter, Meredith, to the hospital because of the problems with her pregnancy.
So the sons are there, but mom and daughter are not. Marvin Brown's stepdaughter Meredith is having pregnancy issues, probably as a result of this shocking murder. So her mother has decided to take her to the hospital to be evaluated.
Can you walk me through where you've been today?
The first idea is to establish alibis. What was everybody doing the day Marvin died? So they determined that the sons are all at work. Deborah and her daughter Meredith are shopping for baby furniture for the new arrival. They have no opportunity to commit the offense.
Thank you.
Aller's task is to have this crime scene speak to him in some way and tell him what can be learned.
The way we viewed everything on scene, it was pretty apparent that somebody had snuck up on this victim.
You immediately begin looking at the individual who made the call, and that's Pete Anderson.
The 911 caller was a friend of Marvin's. A lot of times, it turns out the people that called 911 had something to do with the death.
He was in from out of town. It was just very odd that he was there during this instance.
What are you doing here, Pete Anderson? How long have you been here? Did you kill and then make the call as if you discovered him? That's entirely possible. Pete Anderson is now in an interrogation room at the police department, as he is the one who is present when the police arrive with Marvin Brown dead on the floor in front of them.
We just want to make sure you're not involved in his death in any way.
Sure, I understand.
This person supplied us with their movements and receipts, and through ATM cameras, we proved 100% he definitely was not anywhere near Belmont County when Marvin was shot. We were able to rule him out as a suspect almost immediately.
In homicide investigations, the expression is you run the wickets. You do what is obvious first, and what is next obvious next, and so on. And that's what they've done with Pete Anderson.
All right, thank you for your time.
So the next step is for Rusty and Aller to go to the coroner and have him tell them about this gunshot wound.
Mr. Brown was shot through the upper to mid portion of the right back. Without some kind of contraption set up to hold a gun and shoot himself, it's almost impossible for this to be a suicide. He didn't have what we call defense wounds on the hands and forearms, so it appears that he was not involved in an assault or a fight situation, and that he was quite surprised from behind.
The shooter took advantage of the situation. He's there to kill Marvin Brown, and rather than confront him, he just shoots him in the back.
Mr. Brown was in very good health for his age. His heart was normal shape and size. I would have expected him to live another decade or two if this trauma did not happen to him.
The day after Marvin was killed, I was just interviewing family and friends all day long. We interviewed Deborah Brown, Marvin's wife.
Then he took that opportunity to ask a few more questions.
Can you think of anyone that might have had a grudge against Marvin?
Marvin is widely known as someone not to be trifled with. He has a long history, and long histories can come back to haunt you.
There was this one thing that happened a few weeks ago. We didn't think anything about it at the time.
One of the things we were told by Deb was that Marvin had had a crossbow stolen from his cabin.
Deborah recalls that there's a guy named Rex Jocelyn who apparently had stolen a crossbow that Marvin used for hunting.
Marvin went out, and when he came back, he had the crossbow. But he never told us what had happened.
So she assumed that they had a confrontation of some sort. Is that enough to kill for her? What if his manhood was insulted because he got his ass handed to him by a 72-year-old man? That certainly would do it, now wouldn't it?
When we learned about this crossbow being stolen, we definitely had a possible motive for Marvin's death. It was the best one we had.
So we need to have a conversation with Mr. Jocelyn and find out where he acquired his taste in crossbows.
I'm Detective Aller with the Belmont County Sheriff's Office.
We'd like to ask you a few questions.
I was able to get a timeline for the whole day. And confirm with this person's foreman and prove that they were nowhere near when Marvin was killed.
The frustrating thing about homicide investigation is 90% of the time, you're pursuing things that turn out to be nothing. You still have to run the Wickets. Several more weeks pass, and Chief Investigator Aller is in the same boat he's been in. He's eliminated 2 suspects. He's established a solid alibi for all 5 of the current family members. And he doesn't have a hell of a lot else.
Tell you what, on this case, from day one, this is definitely going to be a long haul.
In Powhatan, people would look right at me and say, I hope they get who did this. This left a void in Powhatan.
Pretty much right off the bat, Marvin's sons, they wanted to help. One of the things that they talked about was, should we post a reward?
And he said, if we dry up, let's do it then.
It's not something that we in law enforcement recommend right off the get-go.
Money complicates everything, and it complicates the truthfulness of humans. People will say anything to get their hands on money. They will point the finger at their own mother.
But enough time had passed. I said, I think now's the time to go forward with your guys' idea of putting a reward out.
I think we started off at $10,000 and we ended up raising it to $50,000 by the end.
$50,000 is a lot of money for anybody, let alone somebody in Powhatan Point. Aller's phones light up in headquarters. Everybody and his brother calls in who absolutely knows who's responsible for this case, for killing Cock Robin and starting the Second World War, if they will just give them the 50 grand. It's been weeks, and Aller has nothing of substance, and there is no worse feeling in the world.
There's a crippling little voice in the back of my head saying it's never going to close.
He is feeling the fear that creeps in of not solving something. I've had that fear. It's horrible. You don't sleep. You are consumed by it. Aller is wading through this mess of people. He finds one. And it's interesting when you find one like this. You just feel it in your bones. A woman calls. The woman's name is Hattie Connor. She reports that she is friends with Meredith.
Hattie Connor gave us our first real break on this case.
Meredith called her and asked her to do her a favor. Marvin's accountant wanted to speak to Marvin suddenly about a concern he had about missing funds from the bank accounts. And Meredith wanted her friend Hattie to call Marvin Brown and pretend to be from the accountant's office so that that meeting could be postponed. Well, how would Meredith know that Marvin's accountant was trying to get a hold of him in the first place? Because Meredith's mother, Deborah, is Marvin Brown's bookkeeper.
Meredith said that her mother needed some time to deal with something.
So, she wanted you to call Marvin Brown and pretend you're from the accountant's office?
Hattie Connor says her mother was in the room, and Mom said, that doesn't sound right. And so she didn't. She never did make that call.
We had to ask ourselves, how much is Meredith involved in all this?
And Aller said, oh my, Hattie, your mother was right. Thank you very much. The old expression applies. When in doubt, follow the money, and it will lead you to the truth.
Thank you.
So Aller is finally getting somewhere. He's got something to chew on. Doesn't prove anything, but it certainly puts him in the ballpark.
As far as looking at the finances of Marvin's company, if you're trying to get a person to pretend to be an accountant, to dismiss an appointment, to keep the owner of the company away from something, this guy just got murdered.
Why would Meredith want to stop this meeting? Is she somehow involved in all of this? That's the question. The answer is to start following Meredith around. So they put an undercover cop on her tail.
Our investigation showed that Meredith had a drug habit. She had a very large pill problem. She was involved with multiple people that were known drug dealers.
So now this cop starts asking questions around town about sweet little Meredith.
At the time, Meredith was an attractive girl.
People were telling us that she used drugs and she manipulated men through sex for drugs and money. No one had anything good to say about Meredith. Everything we learned about her was more suspicious as time went on.
Aller knows he's onto something, but he's not exactly sure what. Meredith had been shopping for baby furniture the whole time and has an ironclad alibi for the moment the murder happened. What he does know is that Meredith is living far from an average life, and she has a habit that she needs to feed. Not only that, but he knows that she tried to trick Marvin into missing a meeting with an accountant. But the question is, why would Meredith want Marvin dead?
The next step was to learn more about the financial stuff. We identified Marvin's accountant and reached out to that person. We learned that finances were not good. The money was screwed up. Deb had not filed a tax return for several years.
So what are you up to, Deborah?
Thank you very much for your time.
Through search warrants and court orders, we obtained all the financial records from Marvin and Deb's bank accounts. There was a probate hearing where Deb was ordered to turn over the accounting records that she was in charge of. I was given those, and I'm looking, I'm like, whoa, wow, whoa. I mean, it was, to a lay person like myself, no problem seeing that these are two different sets of books. The books that she turned in, they were fake.
Aller looks at withdrawals made by Deborah from ATM machines in cash, thousands upon thousands of dollars. When you're a homicide detective, you have to become a priest, a marriage counselor, a psychiatrist. One of the things he's had to become is a amateur accountant. Deborah is covered in a cloud of suspicion. So then the question becomes, all right, Deborah, let's say you're a thief. So where's the money?
Deb doesn't appear to be someone that's living large. You're someone that's stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're driving a brand new car, fancy vacations, things like that.
The subject's on the move. I'm calling.
What are you up to, Deborah? What exactly do you need the money for? Now it becomes more than a pursuit of the money. It becomes a pursuit of what you did with it.
And talking to different confidential informants in the Powhatan area, we learned not only Meredith had a bad prescription pill problem, Deborah did as well.
And when we come to find out, Deb's putting down $500 to $700 a day for pills for her and Meredith.
Both Deborah and Meredith are drug users. That's where the money goes. It goes to narcotics, as it always does.
On top of that, she's got a huge gambling problem. So she's popping pills, spending this money all day long. When she's out of it, she goes out to the ATM and takes $500, $700 out all day, every day. You look at a withdrawal for, let's say, $500 from an ATM right next to her favorite gambling parlor. I mean, she literally deleted that transaction from the books that she had turned into the court.
The most dangerous machine in the casino is the ATM. Deborah's taking $500 hits in the ATM machine that's located across the street from her favorite casino. How convenient. In light of this new information, things appear a little different. The detectives begin to reassess the behavior of the widow, starting with the day of the murder.
I remember that day. One thing that stood out is Deb kind of just took off. We had learned that Meredith was having some pregnancy issues. I thought it was very weird. There were multiple other family members that could have took her. This is her husband laying murdered. She just kind of takes off.
So now Aller develops a new theory of the case. Mom and daughter have a great alibi, but they have the right companions, ones that will kill for money. 6 months since this investigation gets underway. So now we know that this mother-daughter team, Marvin Brown's wife and stepdaughter, had been robbing him blind for years, and they were about to be found out. When Marvin discovers their thievery, their life is going to change dramatically for the worse. Well, they can't have that. They have a good alibi, but they certainly know the right people. Perhaps one of them would take care of this problem by removing Marvin Brown from the planet.
Here's Deb. She's stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. She's about to get found out. And then this guy ends up dead 2 weeks later. We didn't have enough to charge Deb with a murder at this point. But she's stealing money, she's making fake books. So we applied and got a search warrant for Deb's house. You never know what you're gonna come across in these types of searches. We found something very interesting.
Mrs. Brown, we'd like to take a look inside the safe.
It was in a gun safe. Deb had the combination to it. We found a box for a compact 9mm pistol.
Ms. Brown, do you have any idea where the gun is for this box?
Where is the gun, Deborah? I don't know. I haven't seen it since my husband bought it. Now, is it possible that Deborah's lying? Well, that's the question.
And it had the serial number of the pistol on it. And we were able to trace that back and find out who sold it. This gentleman, he actually remembered the transaction, and he's pretty sure that Marvin said that he bought it for his wife. And at this point, we talked to all Marvin's family and friends.
Just a lot of anger because my dad loved Deb to death. He trusted her with everything. Her kids, same way. And that's what really pissed me and my brothers off, because my dad gave them everything they had.
By this time, I could also talk to the accountant because, you know, I was fiduciary. As soon as I received my fiduciary papers, me and my wife went to the bank and had them print out the last 6 months of transactions. My wife was in the car, and I handed her half of them, and I started looking at them, and she started crying almost immediately. It was just pages and pages of $500 ATM withdrawals.
Marvin Brown's 3 sons are devastated by the loss of their father and by the involvement of the only person he really cared about, his wife, Deb. They cannot understand why Deb and her daughter Meredith would do such a terrible thing. The reason they can't understand it is they're not low-life drug addicts, and they can't achieve that level of depravity because they've never experienced it.
Detective Aller asked if Dad was a guy that had a lot of handguns and pistols, and Dad wasn't a handgun guy.
No one ever known him to own a 9mm. So finding out that he bought one and that his wife had access to it and it's missing was huge for us.
Now he has a set of cooked books. He has an empty gun box of the correct weapon made by the correct company. And all fingers point at Deborah Brown.
She was at that point interviewed about the financial crimes. She knew we had her cold for all the financial stuff, so she admitted to taking the money for the drugs and the gambling and whatnot and hiding it from Marvin. But she held fast on not knowing anything about the murder. We could tie her to the embezzlement, but to put her directly in the murder in a court of law, we weren't there yet.
Stand up. Deborah Brown, I am arresting you on suspicion of fraud.
Aller is absolutely convinced that Deb and her daughter Meredith are the masterminds behind this death. But Aller can't prove it. He can't put a gun in their hand. He can't put them at the scene. He has no evidence to support it. So Aller decides the best pathway to that information is to start arresting the associates of Deborah and Meredith for sale and transactions in narcotics to see what they can tell him.
We descended upon all criminal associates of Deb and Meredith we could think of. We squeezed them hard. And we ended up busting several of Meredith's drug dealer boyfriends for trafficking drugs. We want information. We want help.
They arrest a number of these people, but they tell them nothing. But there's one guy whose name keeps coming up again and again, and his name is Stephen Moore.
You should talk to Stephen more. That guy hangs around Meredith all the time.
Steve Moore's a resident of Powhatan. He's well known in the sheriff's office, extremely long criminal history for theft and drug offenses. Moore had been involved with Meredith for several years. We definitely started looking at Moore for being involved in this homicide. This whole operation was our last shot, and we had to do it just right.
Hey, what's up, man?
An officer spent about a year working on this and was finally able to get into Stephen's circle and started purchasing drugs on a fairly regular basis off Stephen. But finally, we executed a search warrant at Stephen's house. And right then and there, I told him, you're done solid on this drug case, and I want to talk to you about Marvin Brown.
Tell me what happened, Stephen.
Okay, so here's the hell up. I want to help you out.
Stephen said, hey, yeah, I do want to talk. And at first, I'm like, I just can't believe, because the whole time on this case, you know, I'm like the dog that gets kicked. But finally, it's starting to happen.
Stephen is surrounded by demons. Stephen has to stop feeling this way. If you don't kill every day, the guilt eats at you. You begin to see the victim in people's faces. You begin to see all sorts of demons come out of the darkness because you're a murderer.
I need help. I need help to get to the people that put this into motion. I knew you killed Marvin. I want you to tell me the truth.
Marvin noticed that there was something that he had an appointment with the accountant, and there was money that wasn't there or something. And he found out about it, and he was supposed to, I mean, I don't know. That's why she wanted somebody to cancel the appointment. You know, reschedule it.
Reschedule? Why does she want to reschedule it? Did she tell you?
And to give them more time to get what they wanted to do.
Which was what?
I guess to have you taken care of.
Right off the bat, Stephen was talking about the accountant. Stephen said Meredith planned to have the accountant called by someone else to give Meredith and Deb time to plan the murder of Marvin.
Their mom would pay somebody if they could get rid of this. And
get rid of what?
Him. Kill him? Yeah.
And then, as he's telling me everything, all this guilty knowledge starts leaking out.
But I know you had a weapon. What kind of weapon did you have?
I think it was a high point.
A high
9mm.
So who gave you that gun?
Meredith.
You got a guy and you're telling him you're screwed unless you cooperate with me. That could still be viewed as you're making someone tell you what you want to hear. You don't want that in an interrogation room. You want the truth. So there's lots of things we build into these interviews to make sure that the person that's confessing to us has guilty knowledge.
Stephen lays this out chapter and verse. He matches every fact of the crime scene, including a weapon, all the right things. It's him, without doubt.
You're not a killer. I know killers. You're not one of them. You did this. And it wasn't you. Someone made you do this. Don't let her win, Stephen. Tell me what happened.
You shot Marvin Brown. Stephen, who shot Marvin Brown? Me.
And eventually, he owed up the fact that he was the one that shot Marvin.
Stephen tells Aller that Deborah gave him $12,000 to kill Marvin Brown.
You call me when it's done.
He was given a high .9mm, the same model that's missing from Marvin's house, that we never released to a soul. It was slapped in his hand by Devin Meredith, along with a bag of pills and $2,000 down. Kill Marvin, and then we'll give you another $10,000.
Stephen tells Aller in his confession that Meredith told him when he should be at the cabin, as she had set up her alibi to be furniture shopping for the baby. Stephen was in the cabin before Brown arrived.
Where were you? Over here under a blanket.
And was hiding under a blanket next to the bed.
Back to the crime scene. Right next to that bed was a blanket, just like he said. No one knew that. No one knew that. But you had to been at that crime scene. And I'm at this point, I'm just like, oh, tell me more, Stephen, tell me more. I walked up behind him and I shot him right in the back. I saw a bullet, I picked up the bullet, and I left. I said, why did you take the shell casing? He says, I didn't see it.
Stephen the genius says, I didn't see it. Oh, okay. I forgot you're a moron, Stephen. That's probably my fault.
Stand up for me, please. Stop right there. Place your arms behind your back.
So Aller now has what he needs. A detailed confession of how this crime occurred, and it was planned by Deborah and Meredith. That certainly should do it, but somehow, maybe it's just not going to.
It was 5 years before it came to a conclusion. The prosecutor and the assistant prosecutor who ran this case wanted to be very cautious.
When you are asking a jury to believe a witness, you must be able to convince a jury that this person is credible, that their information is reliable, and they certainly can't do that with Stephen Moore.
Stephen Moore's stories begin to change on such a level that using him as a witness was not ever going to be possible in a court of law.
Stephen is an unreliable witness. He does not have a specific way to prove he ever received $12,000 from anyone. So in the opinion of the district attorney, none of that adds up to clear and convincing. March 20th, 2015, Deborah Brown pleads guilty to theft and tampering with evidence. She serves 3 years in prison for these crimes. She's released, and a few months later she dies of cancer and has to answer to a higher authority. And exactly 3 years later, March the 19th of 2018, Meredith is arrested.
But we were able to get an arrest warrant for Meredith based off of Stephen's confession. At that point, she had moved. She was in West Virginia. We had to supply West Virginia with the warrant affidavit. Somehow, my affidavit ended up in the hands of a local news media. When it became public record and was on the 5 o'clock news, it's ruined. Meredith was indicted for other crimes. She was not indicted for the homicide.
Meredith was convicted of obstruction of justice and is sentenced to 2 years home confinement. Neither woman was charged with murder. Stephen, on the other hand, decides to plead guilty to first-degree murder in the death of Marvin Brown. He is sentenced to life in prison plus 17 years in the state of Ohio, where he remains today.
Well, I lost hundreds of hours of sleep over this case. From 2013 to 2018, it's an eternity to work a murder case.
I think people still feel that not everyone who had a hand in it has been brought to justice.
Just the disappointment of Deborah and Meredith getting away. I would gladly let Stephen walk away to watch them two go to prison the rest of their life.
There's so many things that, you know, both of our, Chris and myself and my brother Mike, I mean, our kids have done a lot to be proud of, you know. And my dad would have, you know,
Aller didn't get all that he wanted. You stay on a case after a million dead ends because you took an oath to be the voice of someone whose voice has been silenced. That's what you said you'd do. And if you said it, you better have meant it. Everybody I know meant it.
Snow eats sound. That's the first thing people forget when they talk about Alaska in winter. Not the cold, not the distance, the silence. Step off the road in late November and the world swallows the crunch of your boots like it's keeping a secret. In 1991, the secret was a girl who didn't come home. A truck idled outside the diner at mile marker 214, engine coughing white into the night. Neon flickered against ice-rimmed windows. Inside, coffee steamed, bacon hissed, and the police scanner gossiped like a bored crow. A name clipped through static, a third call, a mother's voice, missing. Not the first in this stretch of highway, not the last, but this one would stick like a splinter under the town's skin. She was 17, a runner with frostbitten knuckles and a shoebox of ticket stubs from the one-screen theater that survived on action movies and once-a-month church fundraisers. A varsity sweatshirt, sleeves tugged down over her wrists. A cracked Walkman that ate tapes unless you treated it like glass. A mailbox stuffed with college brochures she read under a blanket while the oil heater clanked like an old man who refused to die. She had a laugh you could pick out in a crowded gym. She had a name the town still says in a half-whisper as if volume might wake whatever's buried, Mara Ellis. Friday night, first real storm of the season. The school dance ended early because the custodians wanted to beat the roads. Parents packed pickups with kids blinking into the white. Mara said she'd grab a soda with friends at the diner and catch a ride. Witnesses say she left at 10:23, zipper teeth biting up to her throat, hood pulled. A gust shoved the door. Silver bells jingled like brittle ornaments. She stepped into the flurry, turned right, started down the shoulder where plows had shoved snow into a waist-high berm. A mile would have taken 15 minutes in summer, in that weather 30. Somewhere between the diner's bells and the Ellis mailbox, the road opened its mouth. Trooper lights bled blue across the drifts. Volunteers fanned into the brush with flashlights and snowshoes, every beam a thin sword against the dark. They found a glove 20 yards from the turnout to Beaver Creek. They found 3 impressions in the snow that looked like someone slipped, caught themselves, rose, moved on. They found a set of tire tracks that wandered from the road's edge, corrected, continued. They mapped footprints like astronomers charting a sky that refused to hold still. Then the storm closed the book. The town did what towns do. It cooked casseroles. It stood in the school gym under fluorescent hum and hugged with arms wrapped over parkas that smelled like diesel and damp wool and soap. It taped flyers to gas pumps and hymnals and the corkboard at the post office where you could rent a backhoe or learn about a lost dog. It called Anchorage News and begged for a segment. It told the story to anyone who would listen, each telling, adding a detail, polishing a corner, turning rumor into a kind of prayer. The investigation began like they all do, with a kitchen table, 2 troopers unwrapped folders, notepads, a Polaroid camera that coughed out soft rectangles like it was spitting teeth. Mara's parents sat with cups of coffee they never lifted. The clock ticked. The dog curled under the table and thumped its tail when someone said her name. Questions. Where was she headed next? Did she have reason to run? Did she have someone new in her life? Any arguments? Any enemies? Any crazy admirers? The mother flinched. The father's jaw set like a vice you could crack knuckles on. Out on the highway, the wind erased and rewrote. It smoothed edges, filled in lines, sugared the world. Searchers went back with cadaver dogs when temperatures eased, noses working the air for grief. Beaver Creek hissed under ice, black water showing like the pupil of an eye. They found a cassette tape tangled in alder. The ink on the label had bled to a bruise. The song, when they coaxed it onto a different spool, was a ballad that played on the top 40 station every 3rd hour that fall. Love like winter, love like storm. It meant nothing and everything. The first suspect was the familiar story, an older boyfriend no one liked. He drove a tan Bronco with a door that didn't match and a sticker of a skull in the back window because subtlety wasn't the point. He said they'd fought a week before. He said she'd called him that night, but he didn't pick up because he was at his cousin's playing cards. The cousin said yes. Cards, yes. Late. The times slipped like minnows. Troopers took photographs of his hands. They lifted tires, measured tread, compared the wandering tracks. Close, not the same. The boy cried in the interview room. People wanted that to be guilt. Sometimes the body chooses water even when it's innocent. The second suspect worked at the diner. Night cook. Grease in his cuffs. A soft voice that hovered at the edge of hearing. He remembered her order like a mantra. Soda, no ice, grilled cheese, tomatoes on the side, extra napkins because she was careful with ketchup. He said she left at 10:23 because the clock stuck on the hour, and he tapped it to nudge the minute forward. He said there was a man by the window who watched her go. Could he describe him? He could. Green parka, ugly orange hat, beard so stiff with ice it looked fake. The man paid cash. The register warbled at drawer close. He left no name. The cook's fingers shook when he poured coffee for the trooper, maybe from cold, maybe from being seen. The third suspect was a rumor. Truckers who ran the highway like a vein talked about a long-haul driver with a radio handle that didn't show up on any roster. A man who collected postcards from state lines and taped them over his bunk like trophies. He'd been in the area that night. He'd been in a lot of areas on a lot of bad nights. Troopers reached out through dots on a paper map. They caught silence and the hum of distance. Weeks became months. The Ellis family took down the tree on January 8th, brittle needles leaving welts on their forearms. They left the string of lights in the front window. In March, the ice on Beaver Creek broke with a report like a gunshot and carried away whatever it had been keeping. Spring came late and muddy. The school held graduation and someone left an empty chair with a cap and tassel and a program folded into a white carnation. The principal's voice cracked on her name. The gym smelled like floor polish and sugar cookies. People cried and said it was for all of them, but everyone knew it was for her. The file thickened. Tips, dreams. A palm reader who saw a white hand reaching from under glass. A hunter who found a pink shoelace in muskeg. A woman from downriver who swore she picked up a hitchhiker with hair like Mara's, only shorter, only darker, only not quite right. Each call got a sheet of paper, a date, a careful note. Each hope burned quick and blue. The case went cold the way lakes do, slowly, then all at once. Years rearranged themselves. People married, divorced, moved to Anchorage or Seattle or south where the snow is a postcard thing. The diner changed owners twice and finally got a clock that didn't stick. The Ellis house grew quiet except for the dog, older now, a soft ghost moving from room to room like a thought the brain can't finish. The mother joined a support group in town, sitting in a circle of church chairs with other parents who spoke in the conditional tense. She would have, he might have, they should have. The father built a shed and filled it with solutions. New locks, floodlights, a motion camera that snapped photos of foxes, and once, in July, a bear that looked offended to be mortal. Then, decades later, the phone rang like it was time itself calling. A lab in the lower 48. A hit. A partial profile from a bootlace that had been sealed, logged, and forgotten like a relic. Technology had learned new tricks. The database had new names. The match wasn't a name yet, more like a shadow leaning over a threshold, more like a breath on the other side of a door. The word that came through the line was the one this town had swallowed and learned to live without. Solved. It was on the Anchorage Evening News before the Ellis family had a chance to tell the dog. Alaska, 1991, cold case solved, said the anchor with a solemn cadence like a bell tolling. The words crawled in white across the bottom of the screen and ran along the radio morning shows and shot like a flare across social feeds. People scrolled with thumbs they couldn't quite feel. Solved. A word shaped like a finish line. A word people tasted and found unfamiliar, as if victory fell from the sky and landed with a thud in the snow. The name attached to the match was a pilot, Bushman. Flew in and out of towns that weren't on maps. Lifted hunters to ridge lines, dropped veterinarians into villages where dogs outnumbered people, carried more mail and secrets than anyone should. He had a grin that said, "I've seen worse," and a jacket that said, "I've been cold for so long I married it." He had a hangar on the edge of a gravel strip wedged between Spruce and River. He had alibis for nights no one had ever asked about. He had a past that looked fine if you only looked from far enough away. When the troopers drove out to the strip, clouds lay like wool over the mountains. Prop wash added wind to weather. The pilot stepped from the hangar with hands in his pockets, a gesture that could hide or warm. They said his name. He smiled like he knew them from fishing or town fair raffles or a time he'd donated a flight to a school fundraiser in a town where generosity was a kind of tax. They told him about the match. The smile fell off his face the way ice slides off a roof when the sun finally shows in March. Not dramatic, inevitable. He said no, like he was testing the sound for structural integrity. He asked for a lawyer. He asked whether they'd searched his plane, his truck, his life. They had a warrant for the hangar, not his home. They told him he could call someone. He called no one. He stood with his back to the Cessna, like a man waiting for a photograph to be taken that he couldn't bear to see later. Word reached town before the troopers crossed the river. People called it a relief. People called it a mistake. People who remembered the diner said the cook had described a green parka, and this man wore denim. People who remembered the Bronco boy said they'd always known it wasn't him, but wasn't that convenient, to always know, to always be right after the fact. People stood at gas pumps with nozzles thunking and watched the footage on the tiny screen above the price per gallon. Solved. The words sat wrong on their tongues. It wasn't obedience, it was hunger pretending to be satisfaction. The Ellis porch light had been left on for years. That night it glowed like a small sun. Reporters shuffled on the street, breath turning to flags. The mother opened the door and said she wasn't ready, which is a sentence that is always true. The father stood behind her and didn't speak. The dog barked at the tripods. The camera crew lowered their lens as if they'd remembered the human part. A reporter asked what they felt. The mother said the only thing you can say when the world brings you an answer in pieces. "I want to believe." The sentence trembled under its own weight. The headline ran, "The town slept badly, the past didn't." It got up, walked the road, stood at mile marker 214 and waited for the bells to jingle on the diner door. Somewhere a plane lifted into morning gray, engine carving the air like a question. Somewhere a creek hissed under ice and a fox trotted along the bank with a treasure no one else would value. And, in the middle of all that winter, a truth just out of reach exhaled, fogged the glass, and didn't write a message with its finger. People love endings. Ribbons, knots, the neat click of a lock turned from the inside. But Alaska is big enough to swallow endings whole and send back only echoes. Solved is a headline. Closure is a story people tell themselves to sleep. Between the word and the waking, there's a distance you can measure in miles or in the long silence that snow knows how to keep. The town waited for morning. The case waited for something it refused to name. And the road, as always, pretended to be innocent. Morning comes thin and gray, a light that looks like it forgot the instructions. The air tastes metallic, like a coin you put on your tongue as a kid just to prove you could. Wind scrapes at spruce needles. Somewhere in town, plows yawn themselves awake and start the daily act of shaving winter down to something passable. The headline has already run its circuit, and the pilot's name has already become 2 syllables dropped into every pot of coffee. The troopers return to the hangar with warrant papers that crinkle like dried leaves, and the camera crews drift in their wake like gulls behind a boat. It's not a parade, it's gravity. Inside the hangar, heat coils tick and pop. The plane sits with its nose toward the wide door, propeller still, oil drip tray catching patience. The walls are a scrapbook of a life above tree line. Laminated sectional charts thumbtacked in overlapping swaths. A faded pinup in a corner so old it feels like an apology. A line of coffee mugs with chipped rims and 3 that read World's Best Pilot, as if the world had taken a vote and got bored. A workbench spills tools in a fan of permission. On a pegboard, a green parka, wrong shade, too new, hangs like a stand-in for a character who missed his cue. The troopers move slow, not out of respect, but because experience teaches you that haste scatters more than it finds. Evidence techs hum their private songs and glove up. Swabs touch surfaces that wouldn't raise an eyebrow to anyone else. The lock on a cabinet, the lip of a fuel can, the handle of a battered thermos. One tech kneels by a plastic bin labeled tie-downs and pulls up a bundle of ropes and straps. Another opens a drawer full of maps and finds a strip of receipts: Avgas, Denali Lodge, oil change, Bethel, coffee, everywhere, rubber banded into a decade. A third unscrews the back of a wall clock that insists it's 9:41 even as radio updates say it isn't. People hide things in clocks. People hide things everywhere. People think hiding is the same as erasing. It never is. They inventory the pilot like he's a room. Height, weight, knuckles, a split on the thumb that says he fixed something yesterday, a ridge of scars along the wrist that could be an old prop bite or a dog with opinions. He offers nothing except a lawyer and a micro-expression when someone says Mara's name, like a muscle forgot its new orders and twitched towards something human. The trooper in charge, a woman with a voice pitched to Carrie and Storm, leans against the workbench and asks him about 1991 as if memory were a filing cabinet anyone could rifle. Where were you that night? What did you see? Who asked you for a ride? Did you notice the way the snow drifted in tongues over the road? Did you notice a girl with a hood and a Walkman and breath like steam? He says the same word again. Lawyer. It lands dull. He is escorted to a chair with a cushion that remembers other men and other silences. He stares past everyone at the tail number of his plane and repeats it in his head like a prayer or a curse. Everyone is allowed their ritual. Back in town, the diner fills early. It always does on mornings with news. Gossip eats breakfast at 6. The night cook is off, but he comes in anyway and stands behind the counter like a man who wandered into his own backstory. He pours coffee into cups that never stay full and watches the door the way you watch a wound to see if it stops bleeding. A couple who taught Mara algebra sit under the TV and hold hands like they're trying to keep track of each other. A logger in a red beanie lists reasons why it can't be the pilot. Church guy, fixed my snowblower, took my niece for a look at moose calves in spring, while his partner ticks off the other list. Too generous, too smooth, too available. Humans lay tracks with language even when the snow would do it for them. The Ellis house is quiet until it isn't. The phone rings in small bursts that turn into an avalanche. The support group calls, the pastor calls, a reporter calls, and then pretends they're a friend calling. The mother sits at the kitchen table with a notepad she didn't know she had in her, writing down questions she doesn't plan to ask. What proof? What if we've been wrong about the shape of this grief? What does solved mean if I still can't sleep? The father walks the perimeter of the yard like he's checking a fence for cracks. The dog watches him with head tilted as if translating. In the shed, under a coil of extension cord and a box of Christmas lights with 3 bulbs burned forever, there's a cardboard archive of photocopies. The flyer, the maps, the article about cold case units in states they've never been to, a letter from a woman in Oregon who said she prayed every day for all the lost ones who didn't get headlines. He takes the box down, opens it, breathes in the dust like incense. He isn't praying, he's remembering how to be the man he had to become. Investigation is a dance with a partner who changes shoes. The troopers widen their circle. They talk to pilots who share coffee in snowed-in towers and tell stories like tall trees straight up until the sky. They interview mechanics who know what planes confess when metal fatigue shows its teeth. They sit in office chairs that wobble and ask dispatchers in villages 500 miles away to pull flight logs penned in careful block letters by a woman with frost-nipped cheeks and a pen that refused to work on Mondays. Not everything is digital. The past is printed, smudged, folded, coffee-ringed. They pile it on tables and pin red string if they're sentimental or draw with dry erase if they're not. They find that in late November 1991, the pilot logged a round trip from the gravel strip to a village downriver and back by 8:50 p.m. He noted crosswind 10 knots, light snow, visibility poor. He refueled. He had time to drive to the diner before close. A receipt shows $3.25, grilled cheese, tomatoes on the side, paid in cash. Coincidence is a bridge you cross when you want to get to the other side of doubt. The cook's memory leans forward in its chair. Green parka, ugly orange hat. The pilot never wears orange. Except in a photograph someone unearths from a fish derby fundraiser in 1990, where he stood on a dock with a halibut like a door and an orange cap like a warning. One picture is not a life, but it is a nail you can hang a theory on if you need to keep it off the floor. The DNA doesn't argue, it hums. The bootlace fragment, sealed in 1991, sat in a box with an evidence number that morphs into a talisman when whispered. The lab, with machines that gossip in light and molecule, coaxed a partial profile like a portrait erased and redrawn by an impatient hand. Years later, another lab taught machines better manners, the profile sharpened enough to match partially to a sample from an FAA medical examination kit pulled from a forgotten file in a federal closet where bureaucracy goes to nap. The match required a leap, familial inference, statistical confidence, a tree of probabilities branching over a forest of unknowns. The state's attorney signs off. The warning label says, "This is science. It still feels like faith." In interviews, the Bronco Boy's name floats back up like a bubble trapped under ice, finally finding a hole. He's older now, softer in places anger once kept sharp. He works at the hardware store and can cut a key by feel. He hears about the pilot and nods like a man whose sentence has been commuted by weather, but he still has the habits of a prisoner. He tells the trooper about a night in 1992 when the pilot bought him a beer at the Moose Lodge and asked whether he ever thought about leaving Alaska. "Every day," the boy said. "There's nowhere else where the sky is an argument." The pilot smiled. "That's why I fly." Memory is not evidence until it is. A woman steps into the station with a paper bag of 35mm prints developed in 1991 and never picked up because she left for college and her father forgot and then died, and then time turned those errands into fossils. The photos are Christmas, driveway, dog and sweater, somebody's mittens on a radiator. In one, a shot through a windshield smeared with thawing snow. The diner at mile 214, neon, trembling. A truck at the curb, a shape by the door. A girl with her hood up, a man with a beard like iced rope, the ugly orange hat riding his head like a warning flare. The date stamped in yellow at the bottom says NOV 91. The clock on the diner is no help. The time printed by the lab is a lie. Those stamps always are. But the angle matches the cook's memory. The girl's posture is a sentence you could write with your own bones. Interviews spiral outward. A CB operator who ran a late-night channel from his kitchen remembers a handle with a voice like gravel saying something about pickup by the creek. He wrote it down because he keeps notebooks like others keep photo albums. He finds the right one under 2 phone books and the instructions for a chainsaw he never owned. The handwriting is small, careful, like a boy's. He wrote, 1040-ish, Beaver pickup. The trooper shows him the photo. He shrugs. "I hear ghosts all night," he says. Back then it was worse. The pilot's lawyer arrives like weather. He's efficient, not cheap, wearing a coat that says Fairbanks money. He shepherds the pilot into silence, which the pilot was already doing just fine. In the interview room, they refuse to answer questions about the night, the receipts, the hat, the picture, the bootlace. The trooper leans into her own stillness because she knows the only leverage against a stacked wall is time. She lays out photographs like a card trick. She speaks the names of places he knows. Beaver Creek, mile 214. The gravel turnout where someone plowed only once and then never again. "You've flown every river bend in this state," she says. "You know how currents hide." He stares at a dent in the table as if it might be a compass. The arrest is not a storm. It's paperwork and a door and the sound a cuff makes when it thinks about betrayal. The town watches the footage and doesn't know where to put its hands. The Moose Lodge has an opinion and then has a second one. At the school, teachers who taught Mara English pull from a cabinet a copy of a book she loved. The margins inked with notes that show the interior of a 17-year-old's mind, arrows pointing to lines about snow and leaving, and what it means to be brave on a Tuesday. The librarian sits with it like it's a warm thing. She has kept it for 20-odd years because she couldn't return it to circulation, couldn't shelve it under E, couldn't let it go where things go that stop being needed. A reporter from Anchorage, young enough to think words like closure wear crowns, stands at Beaver Creek with a cameraman and narrates what everyone already knows because broadcasting is the art of applauding echo. Behind them, the creek whispers whatever it's always whispered. Ice doesn't confess, it bargains. The anchor back in studio uses phrases like chilling discovery and long-awaited justice and haunted community in a tone that slides off the ear like oil. People watch anyway because they want to see their pain suit up for television. There's a box in the evidence room with Mara's name on it, thick with the strata of attention. At the bottom, a sweater and a Ziploc bag that still smells faintly of a laundry soap the company doesn't make anymore. The trooper who pulls it up is young. She was a toddler when the headline first tried on its shape. She reads the old reports like archaeology. Handwriting styles, ink faded, a note in the margin that says, "Ask Denny about plow pattern" in a scribble that turns Denny into Donnie and back again depending on whether the officer had slept. She follows the breadcrumb trail to an old road crewman who tells her that drift fences went up that winter at the one spot where snow liked to pretend it was sentient. Right where the girl would have walked, he says, right where somebody could stop and not get seen. He says it without looking up from a mug of coffee that scalds more than it warms. In a back office at the hangar, the troopers find an old logbook not for flights but for repairs, written in a hand tight enough to squeak. On December 2nd, 1991, the pilot notes, replace tie-down, braided lace, field fix. The trooper runs a finger under the line like it's a spell. Braid a lace to fix a strap. The bootlace in evidence is braided nylon, not the cotton kind you'd pull from sneakers. The lab tech, when told, gives a sound like a fox bark. Science loves a coincidence that gets demoted. Night comes early. The Ellis porch light throws a circle that moths mistake for summer. The father sits in the living room in the chair that points, not at the TV, but at the window facing the road, because old habits bargain with the dark. Across town, the pilot stares at the ceiling of a holding cell that smells like bleach when someone has done their job and like breath when they haven't. He counts rivets in his head. He inventories clouds he's flown through, lenticular, cumulus, trouble. He thinks of the strip of road between the diner and the mailbox and how short a mile is if you're a crow. He thinks of a night decades ago and sees only pieces of it, as if memory itself were snowing and drifting over the parts you'd rather it didn't. You'd expect the past to crack open now, to spill names and steps, and a motive like a coin someone finally fished from the pocket of a coat they forgot in spring. It doesn't. It shifts, like a sleeper rolling over as if to say, not yet. The town will learn that solved doesn't mean answered, that the ache moves rooms but doesn't leave the house. The trooper will return to the hangar in the morning with a new warrant and a hunch she can't back with anything other than the way the hairs on her arm made a decision without asking her. The diner will open. The cook will tap the new clock even though it doesn't stick. The creek will speak under ice. The last breath from the 1991 storm will still be traveling, thin as thread, through spruce. A reporter asks into a camera, why did he do it? The question walks off into the white and comes back carrying nothing you can hold. Maybe it was impulse, a flicker of predation dressed as kindness. Maybe it was calculation, a ride offered with a route in mind, a turnout with a drift fence that made a blind. Maybe it was an accident that turned fatal, a slip on a berm, a panic that multiplied, a choice made and then copied, until it became a man's whole handwriting. The town doesn't want any of those. The town wants a neat story with a lesson and a person you can avoid if you follow the rules. The rules huddle in a corner and shrug. Night reaches into pockets and finds stars like loose change, scatters them stingily. In the shed, the father closes the box of photocopies, carries it back to the shelf, pauses, sets it down on the workbench instead. He unscrews a jar of screws and dumps them into his palm, feels the weight, the scatter, the way pieces want to roll their own way, unless you thumb them still. He thinks of all the ways bolts hold two things together that would rather wander apart. He turns off the light. The porch lamp keeps shouldering the dark alone. In the morning, a new phone call will come, not from the lab, not from a reporter, but from an old neighbor who moved south and never looked back, whose attic back home hides a box of tapes from a handheld camcorder that recorded birthdays, sledding, and, once on accident, the diner parking lot with headlights sweeping and a voice-off camera saying, "Is that Mara?" The tape will be grainy and stubborn. The sound will be bad. But in the frame for a second, you will see the decision that changed the town, as ordinary as breath. A man stepping closer, a girl adjusting her hood, the whites swallowing their edges. That's how shocks arrive, not as thunder, but as a gesture you could mistake for kindness if the night is cold and the road is long. For now, the case is the body moving in sleep. The word solved sits on the nightstand like a glass of water. No one touches it. The trooper stands at the hangar door and watches snow fall in a slant and thinks of all the times the sky has lied about direction. She puts her hand flat on the metal and feels the cold come up into her bones. She doesn't believe in closure. She believes in work. She believes in returning. She believes that somewhere in this place where silence eats sound, the truth is still speaking, and if she listens long enough, she'll catch it between two gusts, a sentence clear enough to write down without her hand shaking. The tape rewinds with a whine like something alive. The neighbor's attic smells of cedar and dust, boxes stacked like tombstones, Christmas ornaments tangled with old coats. He hands the camcorder to the troopers as if it's an explosive, palms open, breath shallow. They take it like relic hunters lifting a bone. Back at the station, the tech feeds it into a machine that protests with static, then blooms into color. Grainy, yes, distorted at the edges. But there, in the rectangle, the diner's neon blinks in 1991, stubborn against the storm. Headlights cut across snow, sweeping bodies into clarity for seconds at a time. A girl, hood drawn. A man, parka heavy, beard iced. An orange hat that glows even in the poor light. The cook's memory, frozen in plastic, thawed on a screen. The room holds its breath. A trooper leans forward, pausing, rewinding, playing again. Each pass feels like scraping a wound. The man's hand lifts, not a grab, not yet. A gesture. Could be a wave, could be a lure. The girl tilts her head, pulling her hood tighter. The camera shakes, cuts off, resumes on a birthday cake and kids yelling. But the fragment is enough to move a case file from dust to fire, enough to turn a man's life into a question no lawyer can mute. The pilot, in holding, doesn't know yet. He stares at a wall too white, chews his lip until it bleeds, tastes metal. In his head, engines roar. He counts minutes the way a flyer counts miles. He's always been good at distance, not so good at closeness, not so good at 17-year-old girls walking home through snow. The Ellis family is told about the tape. They sit at the kitchen table again, the same table where questions were asked in '91, the same table where casseroles once piled, where the mother pressed her forehead to wood that still carries the indent of her grief. The trooper doesn't show them the footage, not yet, just the description. The words are enough. The mother weeps into her hands. The father stands, fists clenched, knuckles bone white. He whispers, "I knew it was someone she trusted," and his voice cracks on the word trusted, like it's a rope frayed beyond repair. In town, the tape rumor spreads before the ink is dry. People whisper at the post office, over pumps, in the pews on Sunday. Everyone has an opinion. Some call it proof, others call it trick of light. A logger insists the man could have been anyone. Orange hats were a dime a dozen back then. A schoolteacher shakes her head. No, she remembers that cap. She remembers him wearing it during a flight demo at the fair. Memory is slippery, but certainty is addictive. Each person grips their version like a talisman. The pilot's lawyer tries to bury it under language inconclusive, low resolution, inadmissible. But the town doesn't care about legal thresholds. It cares about the shiver that runs through spines when truth walks into the room, even in grainy pixels. The diner cook hears about the tape and starts crying at the sink, soap bubbles slipping over his wrists. "That's him," he says to no one, to everyone. "That's the man I saw. I told them. Meanwhile, the troopers dig deeper. Flight logs re-examined. The round trip on November 29th now reads suspicious, a window wide enough for disappearance. Fuel records point to gaps, unexplained gallons. A tie-down strap mended with braided nylon, logged like an afterthought, now screams. Science is asked to do what memory cannot. Lab reports, probability trees, algorithms hum. But Alaska doesn't run on certainty, it runs on stories and silence, and both are dangerous. The Ellis mother writes in her journal that night. She hasn't written in years. She writes, "If the tape is real, then he stood close enough to touch her, close enough to breathe her air. Did she see his eyes? Did she feel afraid? Did she hope he was safety?" She stops, pen shaking. The page smears with tears before the ink can dry. She closes the book and puts it in a drawer, as if locking the words away might silence the memory they conjured. Outside, the snow falls like it remembers every secret buried beneath. The creek gurgles low under ice, refusing to close its mouth. Somewhere, a fox trots, tail high, ears twitching at sounds only it can hear. In the holding cell, the pilot dreams of engines, of rivers seen from above, of the one night he cannot rewrite no matter how many times he turns it over in his head. He wakes with the taste of frost on his tongue and the weight of a girl's name on his chest. The trooper assigned to the case sits in her cruiser, engine ticking against the cold. She replays the tape on a laptop, again and again, her face lit by the glow. Each time, she looks not at the man but at the girl, her posture, her steps, the way she tightens her hood. There's something in that motion, something primal, as if she already knew the storm had turned against her. The trooper clenches her jaw. She swears she hears a whisper in the static, not words, just the warning that no one understood in time. The headline will come again, bigger, louder. Alaska, 1991, cold case solved, videotape evidence surfaces. But headlines don't hold the whole story, they never do. Behind the bold letters is a family's nightmare replayed, a community's wound reopened, a pilot's grin turned into a mask. And under it all, the silence of snow swallowing every sound except the one that matters. The echo of a girl stepping out of a diner door, never to come home. The videotape sits in the evidence room like a live wire, spitting static even when it's off. Copies are made, sealed, locked away. Prosecutors lean forward, adjusting glasses, words tight as wire. Chain of custody, authentication, expert testimony. They argue about pixels as if pixels could bleed. But the town doesn't argue. It is already decided. The image of the orange hat is tattooed onto every conversation. At the grocery store checkout, at the gas pump, over poker games in basements that smell of beer and dust. People don't talk about weather anymore. They talk about him, the pilot. At the diner, a new clock ticks like it's proud to work. The cook still taps it, habit muscle deep. He tells the trooper he can see the scene every night when he closes his eyes. The girl walking out, the bells over the door clinking brittle, the man at the window not moving until she was gone. He says the tape proves he wasn't crazy, that his memory wasn't a trick. The trooper nods but doesn't confirm. She knows memory is an animal that bites both ways. The pilot's hangar becomes a shrine of suspicion. Search teams crawl through every corner. They lift floor panels, brush dust from rafters, scrape oil pans for residue. A bag of nylon straps is tagged, logged, boxed. A map with circles in red marker goes onto the table, the ink faded, lines blurred where coffee once spilled. His lawyer calls it coincidence, but to a jury it looks like choreography. Each circle, each mark, falls close to places where rumors lived, where hunters swore they'd seen a girl in the brush, where truckers said headlights stopped too long, where silence grew too heavy to be natural. The Ellis mother is invited to Anchorage to watch the tape. She says yes, then no, then yes again. The drive takes hours, the highway flanked by spruce like witnesses with their heads bowed. In the viewing room, the screen is small. The tape stutters. She presses her knuckles against her lips, staring, staring. At first she doesn't blink. Then she does, rapid, like fighting off tears that arrive anyway. When the hooded figure appears, she whispers her daughter's name, once, twice, like calling her home across the years. When the man in the hat steps into frame, her whole body recoils. She shuts her eyes. "That's him," she says, though no one asked the question. The father doesn't speak. He doesn't watch the rest. He turns away, face hard as carved ice. On the drive back, he grips the wheel too tight. At home, he goes to the shed and stays there until the light burns out. The sound of hammer on wood carries across the yard, into the night, into the dog's restless sleep. The pilot himself finally hears about the tape and holding. His lawyer explains careful, rehearsed. For the first time, the man flinches. He says one word, impossible. His voice cracks on the middle syllable. He shakes his head, repeats it, as if denial might erase magnetic tape. He refuses to watch. He says it isn't him, says anyone could wear a hat, says the state wants someone to blame. But behind his eyes, something shifts. He knows the town has already chosen its story, and stories in Alaska don't die easy. The investigation circles back to Beaver Creek. Troopers return with ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, shovels. The creek hisses beneath ice, mocking them. Snowdrifts hide secrets too well. They find nothing but branches and frost. But hope is a stubborn fire. Every volunteer scans tree lines, certain that this time, this year, the ground will surrender something. Each silence feels heavier than a body would. Reporters arrive in packs. They stand in boots too new, parkas too clean. They say words like haunting, chilling justice. They put microphones in faces that have nothing left to give. The community grows brittle under the attention, snapping when prodded. "We don't need outsiders telling our story," a man at the gas station mutters. Yet he watches the segment anyway when it airs, nodding when the anchor repeats his pain back to him in perfect sound bites. The high school gym holds a vigil, candles trembling under fluorescent lights. Kids who weren't born in 1991 hold photos of a girl they never met. Her name echoes in prayers. Her yearbook photo smiles from the wall, eternally 17. A teacher reads a poem about winter swallowing and spring refusing to bloom. The silence that follows is heavier than applause. The pilot's trial begins to take shape in whispers and drafts. The state has DNA, partial but persuasive. It has the videotape, shaky but searing. It has a community's collective memory, sharpened over decades like a knife. What it doesn't have is a body. What it doesn't have is a confession. The lawyers know the hole in their case is wide enough to swallow a verdict, but they also know juries are human and humans ache for endings. Late one night, the trooper replays the tape alone. The image flickers, cuts to static, resumes. She leans close, pausing frame by frame. At the corner of the screen, just before the light shifts, she sees something small. The girl's hand lifting, not waving, not beckoning, but reaching. Maybe for the hood, maybe for balance, maybe for help. It freezes her, that gesture. She wonders if the tape is less evidence and more ghost. Mara herself reaching out, demanding not justice, not closure, but memory. The snow keeps falling, relentless. Each flake settles on the road, on the creek, on the roofs of houses where people lie awake, listening. Alaska doesn't forget. It buries. And every burial is only temporary. The courthouse in Anchorage is a slab of gray against a sky that can't decide if it wants to snow or rain. The pilot is led through the side entrance in cuffs, flanked by troopers who look like they've been carved from the same concrete. Cameras flare, microphones thrust forward like bayonets. Reporters shout his name, the words cold case, videotape, DNA bouncing off the steps. He keeps his head down, lips pressed thin. The orange hat doesn't appear, but the town sees it anyway. In their minds, he wears it like a crown of guilt. Inside, fluorescent lights bleach everything. The jury pool waits, shifting in chairs, summoned into a story that began before some of them were born. Prosecutors set their folders in neat stacks, yellow tabs like teeth ready to bite. Defense counsel spreads out motions, objections already written before the first word is spoken. The judge watches over it all with a face that says he's seen too many lives unravel on this carpet, and this one will be no different. The Ellis family sits together in the second row. The mother holds a handkerchief she never unfolds. The father sits stiff, eyes fixed not on the defendant but on the table in front of him, as if staring at wood grain will keep his anger from spilling into fire. Around them, friends, neighbors, strangers fill the gallery, their whispers like a hive. Some came for support, some came for spectacle. Everyone came to see if 3 decades of silence could finally make a sound. The state begins with the tape. The grainy image fills the courtroom monitor. Neon flicker, storm blur, 2 figures at the diner door. The prosecutor narrates like a surgeon guiding eyes to an organ no one wants to see. This is Mara Ellis. This is the last time she was seen alive, and this, the finger points, is the man who took her. The room inhales. Some jurors lean forward squinting. Others look away, uncomfortable with watching a crime that refuses to fully appear. The defense rises, voice sharp, slicing through the silence. This tape proves nothing. You cannot convict a man on shadows and snow. But shadows have weight. They fall heavy across memory. The cook testifies next, voice trembling, describing the night, the clock, the parka, the hat. He repeats what he said for 30 years, that he saw a man watching her, a man who left right after she did. The defense hammers him. How sure are you, after decades? Can you swear it wasn't someone else? The cook breaks, tears sliding down his face. I see him every night when I close my eyes. Don't tell me I don't know what I saw. The courtroom shifts, discomfort turning into something harder, sharper. The jury is shown the flight logs, the receipts, the note about the tie-down strap repaired with braided lace. The bootlace itself, tagged, sealed, lifted from 1991, is held up like a relic. Science takes the stand in the form of a lab tech with calm hands and cool explanations. DNA, probabilities, partial match to the pilot's FAA medical file. The numbers are precise, the words cautious. It is not absolute, the tech admits, but the likelihood of this match being random is vanishingly small. The jury scribbles notes, pens scratching like claws. The defense counters with its own expert. He speaks of contamination, chain of custody, the imperfections of early 90s evidence handling. He says the tape could be anyone, the DNA could be anyone, the memory of a cook could be anyone's ghost. He plants doubt like seeds, hoping one juror lets them grow. He glances toward the pilot, who sits silent, stone-faced, jaw clenched. Outside, the town feels the trial like weather. Conversations end with the same refrain, guilty or not guilty. People replay their own memories. The Bronco boy, now a man grayed at the edges, sits at the back of the courtroom, head bowed. He was once the prime suspect, once the boy everyone side-eyed. He listens to the testimony, each word peeling a weight from his back, but the scar it left doesn't fade. When the prosecutor passes the orange hat, bagged and tagged from a box in the pilot's hangar, the man exhales like a prisoner who has been released too late to matter. The Ellis mother avoids the evidence photos. The Ellis father doesn't blink. When asked later what he thought of the trial, he will only say, "I wanted to hear her footsteps again." The words mean nothing to the lawyers, but to the town, they land like stone. The trial stretches, each day longer than the last. The jury sees diagrams, hears dispatch recordings, reads transcriptions of tips that once seemed wild but now feel like prophecy. A trucker's radio log, a woman's memory of a hitchhiker, the scribbled note about drift fences and plows. Each piece is a nail, hammered one by one, building a coffin of circumstance. The defense calls it flimsy wood, the prosecution calls it the shape of truth. When the tape plays again, slow motion, frame by frame, the jurors lean forward. The hand gesture, the hood tug, the step too close, the prosecutor's voice drops. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment Mara Ellis disappeared, right here, right in front of us, and the man beside her is sitting in this courtroom. Silence spreads, thick as snow. The jury stares at the screen. The town waits outside, breath fogging against the cold glass doors, every heart beating the same drum, guilty, not guilty, guilty, not guilty. Alaska, 1991. A mile of road swallowed a girl. Now the state tries to swallow the man they say took her. The verdict is still days away, but tonight as the courthouse lights snap off one by one, the case doesn't rest. It lingers in the air like frost, sharp, invisible, impossible to shake. The jury disappears behind a door that groans on its hinges, and the town holds its breath. Outside, the courthouse steps are crowded, boots scuffing ice, hands buried in pockets. Reporters wait with cameras poised, steam rising from their mouths as they narrate every flicker of movement. The word verdict floats through the cold air like smoke. Inside, the Ellis family sits stiff on the bench, the mother gripping the handkerchief she's worn thin, the father's fists welded to his knees. The pilot stares at the table, his lawyer whispering strategies that sound thin against the weight of silence. Hours turn to a day. The jury eats sandwiches on paper plates, drinks lukewarm coffee, shuffles through exhibits until the paper cuts blur together. They argue, voices low, measured. Some lean on the tape. Shadows don't lie, they insist. Others point to the DNA, partial, but strong enough. A few hesitate. No body, no confession, no certainty. But certainty is a luxury they can't afford. After decades, what's left is probability, story, suspicion hardened into something almost solid. When the jury files back into the courtroom, the sound of chairs scraping the floor is thunder. The foreman rises, paper in hand, voice steady but pale. We, the jury, in the case of the state of Alaska versus... The name lands like a nail. Find the defendant. The pause feels like eternity cracked open. Guilty of murder in the first degree. The gallery erupts, gasps, sobs, whispers like wind through pine. The Ellis mother crumples into her hands, shoulders shaking. The father stares straight ahead, lips pressed thin, eyes wet but refusing to blink. In the back row, the Bronco boy, now a man who carried 3 decades of suspicion, drops his head and exhales, as if someone finally unchained him. The cook from the diner wipes his eyes on his sleeve, murmuring, "I told them, I told them." The pilot doesn't move. His face stays a mask, jaw tight, eyes hollow. But his hands tremble, barely. A twitch his lawyer notices too late. He mutters no once, then again, louder, but the word is swallowed by the sound of cuffs snapping shut. The gavel falls, sharp, final, like ice cracking on a lake. News spreads faster than the wind. Radios and gas stations blare it. Alaska 1991 cold case solved. Headlines crawl across screens. For a moment, the community exhales. Relief and disbelief tangled. People call each other, voices trembling, repeating the verdict like a mantra. Guilty. They found him guilty. It feels like justice, almost. But justice isn't the same as peace. That night, in the Ellis house, the porch light still burns. The mother sits at the kitchen table, the verdict echoing in her ears, and whispers, "But where is she?" The question cracks the air like a storm. The father goes to the shed, slams the door, and the hammer's rhythm begins again. He builds because building is the only way to keep from breaking. The trooper who carried the case across decades drives back to Beaver Creek. She stands by the bank, flashlight beam trembling over ice. Snow crunches underfoot. The creek whispers, as it always has, secrets carried under frozen skin. She stares into the dark and knows. A guilty verdict doesn't mean the ground will give back the girl. Solved, they call it. But the night in 1991 is still out there, pacing, unfinished. The town sleeps uneasy. Some dream of orange hats, some dream of snow-swallowing footsteps, some dream of Mara herself, walking that mile, her hood pulled tight, her breath a ghost in the storm. The trial ended, but the cold still lingers, seeping into every wall, every heart, because the truth isn't only about who was guilty, it's about what was lost and what was never found. And in Alaska, winter always remembers. The sentence comes a month later. The courthouse fills again, though the frenzy has dulled. Reporters still gather, but their voices are less sharp, their scripts already written. Life without parole. The judge's words fall heavy, flat, like snow sliding off a roof. The pilot stands in his prison blues, wrists shackled, staring past the room as if the ceiling holds some map only he can read. His lawyer speaks of appeals, of errors, of evidence too thin. The gavel interrupts, final. The pilot is led out. Cameras follow him down the corridor, recording every step, every blink, a man shrinking into the machinery of punishment. The Ellis family doesn't celebrate. There are no cheers, no smiles. The mother whispers, "Thank you," to the trooper who stayed, who fought the file into the light. The father grips her hand, but his eyes are distant, still locked on that 1 mile of road. Afterward, at home, the house feels louder for its silence. The porch light still burns, a symbol, yes, but also a wound that refuses to close. The community splits. Some call it justice. They nod relieved, tell each other the nightmare is done. Others mutter doubt. No body, no confession, no absolute proof. At the diner, debates flare. The cook insists the verdict is right. A logger at the counter shakes his head, muttering about shadows, about the state wanting a win. Coffee cools in mugs, voices sharpen. The town feels the crack, fault lines under snow. Reporters move on. The story shrinks into columns, into documentaries that promise exclusive footage but offer nothing new. For outsiders, the case is solved, finished, consumed. For those in town, it is a stone still pressing on their chest. In prison, the pilot receives no visitors. He walks the yard, eyes on the sky, counting clouds. He writes letters no one reads, pages of loops and numbers, sketches of rivers and runways. Guards say he whispers sometimes in his sleep, a girl's name breaking from his throat. Others say he doesn't speak at all. The trooper drives this highway again, past mile 214, past the diner with its flickering neon. She pulls over by Beaver Creek, gets out, stands in the cold. The snow is deep, the kind that erases tracks in minutes. She shines her light across the drift fence where someone could have stopped unseen. She feels it, the unfinished. The jury gave a verdict, the judge gave a sentence, but the creek hasn't given back the girl. The land keeps its silence. In the Ellis shed, the father opens the box of photocopies one last time. He adds the latest headline, Alaska, 1991 cold case solved. Guilty verdict brings justice at last. He places it on top, closes the lid, but doesn't tape it shut. He knows he'll open it again. He always does. That night, the mother dreams of Mara. She sees her daughter standing on the roadside, snow whirling, hood pulled tight. She calls to her. Mara turns, half smile, eyes bright. Then the storm swallows her, as it always does, leaving only silence. She wakes with tears, whispering, "Where are you?" into the dark. The town sleeps restless. Even with the verdict, the orange hat lingers in their minds. The tape replays in imagination. The creek whispers. The snow buries, but never forgets. They call it solved, but Alaska knows better. Some mysteries don't end. They wait. And in the distance, the night still holds its secrets, pacing the road where a girl once walked into the storm and never came home. The verdict echoes like a church bell that won't stop ringing. At first, people nod to each other on the street, relief in their eyes. Finally, they say, "It's over." But relief curdles fast. In the diner, the cook overhears a trucker mutter that shadows don't prove guilt. At the gas station, a man whispers that the state just wanted someone, anyone, to bury. By the post office, a woman insists she saw Mara weeks after that night, hitchhiking north with a stranger. Doubt spreads like frost on glass. Thin, sharp, impossible to scrape clean. The Ellis mother avoids these voices. She keeps her focus narrow. On the porch light, on the framed photo of her daughter smiling against a backdrop of mountains, she tells herself the verdict is justice. But alone at night, she admits the truth. She still doesn't know what happened on that road. She wants details, not verdicts. She wants to know whether her daughter was afraid, whether she fought, whether the last sound she heard was snow, creek, or something darker. The not knowing gnaws at her more than the years ever did. The father's harder, he says little, works in his shed, hammering wood into shapes no one asks about. He listens to the news when they say life without parole and shakes his head. He knows prisons don't keep the past away. He knows guilt doesn't plant a cross in the ground where a body should be. He wants bones, fabric, a single strand of hair. He wants something that proves his daughter existed in more than memory. The pilot writes letters from prison. They arrive at the courthouse, stacked, unopened. He addresses them to no one. Some are equations of flight paths, altitudes, wind speeds, scrawled in looping ink. Others are fragments. She stepped into the storm. The road opened its mouth. You don't understand the snow. Guards say he whispers Mara's name, but only once in a while, like a word that escaped against his will. The trooper can't let it go. She drives the highway in silence, windows fogged, heater rattling. She stops at Beaver Creek, stands by the drift fence, and shines her flashlight into the dark. She's walked this ground 100 times. Every time it refuses her. But this time, she kneels, hand brushing the ice, noticing a depression in the snow where nothing should have been. Her gut tightens. She marks it, logs it, returns the next day with a team. They dig, shovels striking earth like heartbeat. What they find is small, a scrap of fabric, blue, frayed at the edges, old enough to belong to 1991, old enough to matter. It's sent to the lab. The Ellis mother is told to wait. She's waited 30 years. She can wait again, but the wait feels sharper now, because every scrap could be the piece she's begged for. The father doesn't go inside when the trooper delivers the news. He stands in the yard, hands buried in his coat pockets, staring at the shed. He doesn't ask what was found. He doesn't want to hope. The town reacts like always, divided. Some call the discovery proof that the verdict was right. Others insist it's too neat, too late. They planted it, whispers a man at the Moose Lodge. They needed something to shut us up. But nobody shuts up. They keep talking, keep debating, keep feeding the fire. The case solved in headlines refuses to stay solved in hearts. That night, the trooper watches the videotape again. She slows it frame by frame, stares at the orange hat, at the gesture, at the blur of snow. For the first time, she notices something no one mentioned. Another shape, just at the edge of the frame, headlights glinting off glass. Another car, parked, waiting. Her blood runs cold. If that car was real, the tape doesn't show the whole story. The question hits her harder than the verdict ever did. What if the pilot wasn't alone? The snow outside hisses against the window. The creek whispers, as it always does, and suddenly, solved feels like a word too fragile to carry the weight of truth. The trooper can't shake the image. She replays the tape again, rewinds, slows it frame by frame until the pixels bleed. There it is, faint, distorted, but undeniable. At the far corner of the screen, just before the birthday party footage cuts in, a flicker of headlights bouncing off glass. Not a reflection, not the diner sign, another vehicle, parked, watching, waiting. She brings it to the prosecutors. They lean close, squinting, muttering. Some dismiss it as artifact, static, nothing, but the trooper feels it in her gut. Someone else was there, she insists. We've been looking at the wrong angle. It wasn't just him. Her words hang heavy in the stale air of the evidence room. The discovery spreads quietly, but in a town that breathes rumor, nothing stays quiet. By the end of the week, the diner hums with new theories. Maybe the pilot had an accomplice. Maybe someone else picked her up. Maybe the orange hat was a decoy, a distraction, a way to steer suspicion. Old faces resurface in whispers. The Bronco boy, the trucker with the unlisted radio handle, even the night cook himself, doubt ricochets wild and hungry. The Ellis mother hears about the car from a neighbor before the trooper can explain. She crumples into a chair, shaking her head. Another one? Another piece missing? How many ghosts do we have to chase? The father doesn't speak. He walks out to the shed, slams the door, and this time the hammer doesn't strike wood. It strikes metal, echoing into the night like a warning. In prison, the pilot hears the rumor. He laughs, sharp, bitter. Finally, he mutters to the guard. Finally, they see I wasn't alone. The guard asks what he means, but the pilot just stares at the window, at the faint outline of mountains, as if someone out there still owes him a debt. The trooper drives back to Beaver Creek. Snow drifts high along the turnout. She parks, steps out, flashlight beam slicing the dark. The creek gurgles beneath ice, mocking. She stands where the car might have been, imagining headlights cutting the storm, another pair of eyes watching Mara walk into the white. She feels the hair rise on her arms. If another driver was there, they never came forward. Why? She radios for backup, but when the others arrive, the snow has already begun to fill her footprints. They search anyway. Shovels bite at frozen earth. Metal detectors whine. The night yields nothing, but silence can be a kind of evidence, too. The town fractures deeper. Some say the verdict stands. Nothing changes. Others whisper the state rushed it, hung a man for convenience while the real truth waits under snow. At the Moose Lodge, a hunter swears he saw 2 sets of headlights that night, not one. At the post office, a woman insists she dreamed of Mara standing beside not one man but 2. Dreams become testimony, rumor becomes gospel, the line between fact and faith snaps in the cold. The trooper doesn't sleep. She sits in her cruiser with the tape glowing on the laptop, eyes burning, replaying that flicker over and over. The question claws at her. If there was another car, another person, then what else have they missed? Was the pilot guilty alone, or guilty with someone, or worse, was he never the one at all? The wind howls across the highway, carrying snow in sheets, erasing tracks before they can be followed. In Alaska, the land never gives answers easily. It buries them, keeps them, taunts those who dig. And as the trooper drives back toward town, headlights carving the dark, she feels it in her bones. The case isn't finished. The verdict was only an intermission. The storm still has secrets. The trooper returns to the tape, frame by frame, until the pixels feel like they're carved into her eyes. That flicker isn't an accident. The reflection off glass is too sharp, too consistent. Another vehicle was there, idling in the snow, which means another set of eyes saw Mara that night, which means the story the state told in court was incomplete. She digs back into the old files, pulling logs no one has touched in decades, CB chatter, tips scrawled on carbon copy paper. A note buried in the margins of a 1991 report. Second car seen near Beaver Creek, disregarded, storm conditions unreliable. She stares at the handwriting, furious at the word disregarded. How many pieces did they bury because the weather was easier to blame than the truth? She starts asking around again. Old witnesses, long memories. Most shrug, tired of talking. But one man, a retired road crew worker, recalls a detail that pins her in place. There was a plow that passed that stretch at 10:40. I saw headlights in my mirror, 2 cars pulled off at the turnout. I figured folks were waiting out the storm. Didn't think much of it, but I remember one of them flashed brights at me, like a signal. The trooper writes it down, her pulse hammering. 2 cars, a signal, not coincidence, not storm, a meeting. Back in town, the rumor takes root like rot. The verdict is questioned in every corner. Church basements, bar counters, grocery aisles. If there was another car, was the pilot the monster they believed, or just part of something larger? Some say he had an accomplice. Others whisper darker. Maybe he was a scapegoat, the decoy in plain sight, while someone else, someone trusted, walked away untouched. Names surface again, dredged from memory. The Bronco boy. Innocent, guilty, innocent again. The trucker with the unlisted handle. Even the diner cook, who knew too much, saw too much, remembered too clearly. Suspicion ricochets through the community, hitting everyone, wounding trust that will never heal. The Ellis mother hears the whispers. She clutches Mara's photograph and asks, not for the first time, Did we get the wrong man? The father doesn't answer. He's in the shed again, hammer silence, sitting in the dark with the box of photocopies on his lap. He doesn't trust the law, doesn't trust the verdict, doesn't trust himself. He only trusts the mile of road that swallowed his daughter, and he hates it for keeping it secret. The pilot hears too. In prison, he smirks when a guard mentions the second car. See, he says, voice flat. I told you I wasn't alone. He won't say more. Not a name, not a detail, just that bitter, knowing smile. The trooper drives to the highway again, haunted. She pulls over at the turnout, kills her engine, lets the silence press against her. Snow hisses against the windshield. In the dark, she imagines headlights flaring beside her, another car idling, another door opening. She imagines Mara stepping toward not one stranger, but two. And for the first time, the trooper feels it in her chest. Maybe they didn't solve anything at all. Maybe they only scratched the surface of something wide or darker, something the snow has been hiding all along. The town says the case is closed. The headlines say solved. But the storm doesn't agree. The storm still waits, holding its breath, keeping names unspoken. And in the silence of mile marker 214, where the bells of the diner once jingled a girl into the night, the truth lingers like a shadow in the headlights, close enough to see, never close enough to touch. The lab calls at dawn, static on the line, then a voice scrubbed raw by coffee and fluorescent light. The scrap of blue fabric from the creek, yes. It belongs, not a full profile, not the neat stamp of certainty people crave, but enough mitochondrial markers to anchor it to the sweater in the Ziploc from 1991. The text says the word associated, careful, clinical, merciless. Associated means she was there. Associated means the creek has been whispering her name for 3 decades and no one learned the language in time. The trooper writes it down and doesn't feel relief. She feels the opposite, the room leaning, the world tipping toward the question that survived the verdict. Who was the other set of headlights? She returns to the tape one last time, dragging the playhead like a blade. The diner hums in the rectangle, neon quivering, snow shredding the frame. The orange hat comes and goes. The girl tugs her hood, and at the edge, flash. Glass catching light, not from the sign, not from the passing plow, a steady, patient engine idling just out of view, as if the camera itself flinched and refused to look straight at the thing capable of breaking it. She prints stills, pins them over the map, with push pins that bite. She draws lines from the turnout to sleeping houses, to names on the old phone tree, to anyone who could afford to wait in a storm without fear of a trooper tapping their window. The town does what towns do when rumor becomes architecture. It renovates itself around the story. In the diner, the cook works with a kind of penance, pouring coffee to the brim, never letting a cup go empty. He stops tapping the new clock. He talks less. In the Moose Lodge, beer sweats on wood while men redraw old nights with better eyesight than they ever had. 2 sets of brights, one says, palm chopping the air. 1 blink, then 2, like a code. At church, the pastor prays for wisdom, and then later, in the parking lot, admits to a deacon he can't stop picturing the moment the storm swallowed a girl and left behind the world they've been living in since. The pilot learns about the fabric from a TV bolted high in a common room that smells like bleach and loneliness. He laughs without sound, shoulders shaking. Associated, he says, rolling the syllables like a bead between finger and thumb. He doesn't look away from the screen when a guard asks if he wants to talk. We were never alone, he says, and the guard tells himself it's nonsense and goes back to counting keys. The Ellis mother sits with the news in both hands like it's a bird that might startle if she breathes wrong. She places the phone down and finally pulls the handkerchief apart. She doesn't cry into it. She lays it flat, smooths the wrinkles, then folds it again with slow precision, the way you fold a flag. The father listens, nods once, stands, and walks to the shed. The dog follows and stops at the threshold, whining softly. The father steps into dim light and opens the box of photocopies. He places nothing inside. He takes nothing out. He sits on the stool and lets the silence do what it knows how to do. The trooper drives to the old road crew yard. Frozen ruts, a chain-link fence groaning under frost. The retired plowman meets her in a coat older than a few of the troopers on her team. He shows her a logbook that survived rodents and bad roofs, the paper browned, the lines wobbling where the pen shook over washboard. 10:40, he says, tapping the column. 1 blink, then 2. He didn't write that part. He carries it in his bones. She asks him who would signal. He shrugs. Folks who plan to meet in a storm. At her desk, the trooper spreads faces across wood, drivers ticketed near the turnout that week, men who called in tips and then called again too many times. Volunteers whose boots were first on the snow, names she knows well enough to say in her sleep and still be tired afterward. In a photograph from December 1991, taken on the second day of the search, a knot of men stand by Beaver Creek, steam rising from their breath like speech balloons. One wears an orange hat, not a twin. The orange is off by 2 shades. The cable knit is wrong. The brim is folded twice instead of once. It is nothing. It is everything. The trooper stares until the orange bleeds past the edges and becomes a color you can't buy anymore. She finds the man from the photograph at the hardware store where bins of lag bolts and hex heads make tidy arguments. He rings up salt and sand and doesn't flinch when she says his name. She shows him the photo. He leans forward, squints, smiles without showing his teeth. Christmas hat, he says. My wife made that one. Everyone had one. It was the year the church sold them to fix the roof, remember? He remembers, he remembers, he remembers. His voice is smooth and local and keeps the right amount of cold on it. I wasn't even here that night, he says, handing her the receipt and making change like exactness can absolve. I was in Fairbanks with my brother. Ask him. She writes it down anyway. She asks anyway. The brother says he was there. The town breathes out like a choir told to rest. In the sheriff's garage, buried under cases of cones and a crate of busted radios, there's a plastic tote labeled 1991. Search Miss C. The lid sticks. It always does. Inside, maps with coffee ghosts, sandwich wrappers, a handful of green surgical gloves turned brittle and the wrong kind of green now, a coil of reflective tape never used, and at the bottom, a key ring with a little aluminum tag, the kind stamped by a machine in a mall kiosk. 3 letters, a number, faded. The trooper turns it in her hand, the metal cold enough to bite. She writes the code down and gives it to the clerk at DMV who remembers her from Thanksgiving potlucks and traffic school. The clerk squints, disappears into a back room, returns with a file folder in a color that bureaucracies reserve for things no one wants to hold. The code belonged to a local tow company. The number is a lot tag. The tow was called in the week after the storm. Vehicle, compact, color, dark. Location, mile marker 214 turnout. Owner unknown. Status auctioned, March 1993. Buyer salvage. It doesn't prove anything. It proves everything. Another car, sitting where the tape says it sat. Hauled away when the town was already too tired to note why. Reduced to parts and then to scrap. Evidence eaten by time and the economy of steel. The trooper thanks the clerk and walks to her cruiser feeling like the world shifted sideways while everyone else kept stepping straight. She takes it to the prosecutor, who rubs the bridge of his nose and stares at the ceiling tiles like they could assemble into a map out of this mess. The case is post-verdict. The pilot is caged. The town has a story it can live with, or at least live next to. You want to dig it up, he says, not unkindly. It's not a question. She nods. And if you find what you think you will, he asks. It's not a warning. It's just weather. She tells him the truth. I don't know. She calls the salvage yard anyway. The number rings into a windy field of memory. A man answers who was a boy then, who ran between mountains of metal playing pirate while his father cut cars into currency. He remembers almost nothing. Almost. My dad kept tags sometimes, he says, voice turning cautious, as if he's about to lend her a thing he can't afford. Souvenirs, he adds, ashamed of the word. They're in a coffee can in the office. He goes and rummages while she listens to the phone static breathe. He returns with a rattle. There's one here, he says, reading the same 3 letters and number out loud. She writes them again, even though they already exist on her sheet in ink that hasn't had time to dry. We tossed the files years ago, he says. Fire, insurance. Sorry, he isn't lying, he doesn't need to. That night, the trooper drives to Beaver Creek without turning the radio on. The sky has the color of bruised bone. She parks at the turnout and kills the lights. For a minute, the dark is complete, a room with the switch removed. Then her eyes adjust. The drift fence hunches like a spine along the road. The creek mutters in its language of stone and pressure. Snow moves like breath. She sits very still. She doesn't ask the place for anything. It gives anyway. On the hard crust near the road, wind has shaved the surface thin, exposing the old ridges underneath. Not tracks. Those are fantasies people draw over land when they're desperate. But a pattern in the earth where plow meets verge, a shape you'd miss on every other night of your life. Here, a shallow, decades-softened depression where a compact might nose in. There, a rust stain on a pebble that was once a bolt or a frame or somebody's life savings after an auction. She gets out, steps carefully into the hush, kneels. Her breath smokes the air. She puts a gloved hand on the snow. It feels like laying a palm against a forehead, waiting for fever. Across town, the Ellis mother takes the scrap of blue fabric. No, the lab has it. She only has the news, and imagines the sweater hole on her daughter's shoulders, the sleeves pushed to the wrist because she ran warm when she was excited. She speaks to the room like it owes her a conversation. I don't want revenge, she says. I want the mile back. The room listens, which is more than most people do. The father locks the shed and sits on the top step with the dog pressed against his thigh. He will never say it out loud, but he has rehearsed it in his head. If the snow gave him his daughter in any form, bone, fabric, a locket that once brushed her collarbone, he would bury her under the birch that looks like a woman lifting both arms. He has a shovel that won't break in frost. He has a coat that doesn't fail him. He has nothing, and he has a plan. The town keeps living because that's the only rebellion it can afford. The diner bangs its bell. The school lines up kids for a fire drill that feels like theater. The Moose Lodge wins at trivia night because someone remembers the population of a county 3 states away for no reason that will ever matter. At the post office, the clerk slides packages across a counter scarred with years of keys. He asks how the mother is, and then he doesn't, because some questions ask themselves and take their answers back. The pilot files his first appeal. A new lawyer with new shoes and a new idea calls the tape tainted and the DNA dangerously seductive, and the jury eager to resolve what cannot be resolved. The judge accepts the paperwork, stamps the date, sets a hearing, and goes home to a house that remembers better music than the radio plays now. On his porch, snow swallows the sound of his boots. He stands there too long. When the hearing comes, months from now, the trooper will sit in a back row and watch as language tries to wring steam from ice. She will testify about the toe tag, the salvage yard, the resurrection of a code no one had any business remembering. The defense will call it smoke. The prosecution will call it wind. The court will call it noted. The pilot will not look at her. He will look past everyone toward a window that used to reflect sky. But that is later. Tonight, the trooper drives back to town under a sky that won't choose a color. In her rearview mirror, the diner sign flickers once, twice, as if agreeing with the plowman. She tells herself it's an electrical hiccup. She slows anyway. At home, she sets the stills from the tape beside the photograph of her own daughter on the fridge. A girl with her mother's eyes and a grin that says gravity is a suggestion. She doesn't do it on purpose. She doesn't do it for effect. It happens because her hands are full and there's a magnet there, and she needs both palms to hold the rest of the case up from the floor. Later, she notices and moves the stills to a folder. Later still, she pulls one out and slides it into a drawer she opens and closes more often than she means to. Headlines will come again. Appeal filed. New evidence suggests second vehicle. Town divided. They will parade in fonts that mistake volume for authority. The cameras will return to Beaver Creek in another winter and point at ice, as if ice performs for strangers. The cook will die someday, years from now, and the new owner won't know why there's a nail by the register where he used to hang a hat that didn't belong to him. The road crew yard will sell its last plow to a younger county with better grants. The salvage yard will surrender to weeds, its machines eaten by the very air they once tamed. The dog will go first, the porch light will burn out, and the bulb will be found in a drawer, replaced by the father with hands that learned how to fix what cannot be mended. And the creek, it will keep its pace, the same as breath, the same as whisper, the same as prayer. Snow eats sound. That's the first thing people forget. They also forget that snow remembers shapes, remembers weight, remembers the exact heat of a human palm against a car hood in 1991, the way it steamed for a second before surrendering. It remembers the way 2 sets of headlights doubled the night. It remembers a girl who looked down to tug her hood, then up because someone said her name, then forward because that's the only direction that exists when you're 17 and the road is a rule you've always obeyed. Solved is a headline. Truth is a country with poor roads and no maps. The trooper knows this. The Ellis family knows it. Even the pilot knows it, which is why he sometimes smiles in a way that suggests victory and sometimes stares at the wall like a man who hears the creak under everything. The town will live with its choice because living with a choice is what towns do. It will carry its verdict the way people carry scars, touching them when storms blow in, swearing the ache means weather is coming, not memory. When the wind lifts and the spruce hisses and the diner bells jingle in someone's dream, the road opens its mouth again. It will never close. Not for this, not for anything like it. In the end, what remains is what began. A mile of winter, a girl's steps, a light left on, and beneath it, a quiet that refuses to be empty, a quiet so full of names you could scoop it with both hands and still come away thirsty. Alaska knows how to keep a secret. It also knows how to speak. You just have to be there at the right hour, where the drift fence bends, where the plow turned, where a tow truck idled under a sky that forgot to choose dawn. Stand there long enough, still as ice, and the land will tell you something truer than any verdict. It will say, I remember. It will say, 2 cars. It will say, she was here, and the rest is weather.